HIV affects everybody. It's not a gay disease. It's very much now a heterosexual disease. There's tons of women getting infected right now. The largest growing population is 13 to 24-year-olds. Women in their 30s. And it's through heterosexual contact. There should be no stigma about that. I was born in San Diego, California, a little naval area called Imperial Beach, and lived there until, I guess I was about 3 or 4 years old. Then moved around a little bit. My father, of course, was in the Navy, and so then we moved to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and then Shreveport. My mother and my sister, who was 4 years older than me, moved in with my grandparents and my mother's sisters in Pofftown, North Carolina. And so that's where I grew up, in Pofftown, in a little place called Lake Hills. I went to Catholic school. I went to St. Leo's here in Winston-Salem, and then I went to high school at Bishop McGinnis Memorial High. Then my mother finally got her own place, and that was a real accomplishment for her. She supported my sister and I going to Catholic school. She worked 3 jobs to do it, and so I really learned a lot about hard work from her. Continuing on, I went to school at UNCG. I needed to stay close to home because the year I started college, my sister was in a terrible automobile accident. And she was 21 years old. She lived in group homes, and I became involved at that point with group homes of her son. I served on their board for probably 7 years. She really learned a lot of independence there. So I stayed at UNCG. When I graduated from college, I started my work at the Winston-Salem Journal. It was my first job. And I was the editor of something called Star Watch. And I moved into a different department, and I started writing. And I wrote pet publications, I wrote golf stories, I wrote anything that they told me to write. When I was doing the pet magazine, it was called Paws, I got involved with Forsyth Humane Society, started volunteering, and then I joined their board in like 98. Was their vice president of their board, and I left the journal. Then I went to work at the Second Harvest Food Bank, and I did development work for them, created a couple of new events. Then in 2003, I went to a national nonprofit called Local Initiative Support Corporation, LISC, and they opened up a Winston-Salem office, and basically their mission was to help small nonprofit groups revitalize communities. So I worked with LISC for several years, and then I got recruited to AIDS Care Service. In 2010, we had a major leadership change, and the board asked me to be the interim president. I couldn't find a better agency to represent that represents kind of who I am in fighting for the underdog. So that's where I am now. Understanding poverty is my passion. It's trying to eliminate some of those disparities between people, the haves and the have-nots, and having the have-nots understand what they can do to empower themselves, to lift themselves up and out of poverty, because I honestly believe that there is systematic poverty, but it's not something that you can't escape. Certain demographics living with HIV are by and large poor and needy. Again, there's disparities even within the disease. It's about access to health care. It's about knowledge about health care. It's about knowing about what to look for with your body and not to be ashamed of things happening with your body. I think that, young people, men and women, they have to break that stigma and just realize that we are sexual beings. With as sexualized as our culture is, you see it in videos, you see it in TV, billboards, there needs to be some responsibility that goes along with that. It's, largely it affects people of color, It's not like it used to be. It used to be a gay white male disease. Now it's not. It's, it's an epidemic in the black community. And why is that? It's access to health care, it's education, it's the stigma. I would say number one is the stigma. And not talking about HIV and AIDS, or even STDs and teen pregnancy, or it's doing such a disservice to all communities. Clients that we serve could not exist without ADAP, the AIDS Drug Assistance Program with the state. Right now, all that it covers is Tier 1 drugs, which are basic life-saving HIV drugs. ADAP is so important because you're right, it stops disease progression. AIDS is the disease progressed in a big way. It also becomes AIDS when you have an opportunistic infection. But when you're immunosuppressed, you're very susceptible to those infections. And so that's something that carries it to AIDS as well. There's only 4 ways that you can contract the disease. Semen, vaginal fluids, mother's milk, and bloodborne, pathogens. But say I'm just newly diagnosed, HIV positive, my doctor decides that they are going to go ahead and put me on a medication regimen, say 1 pill once a day, which is just miraculous now. Now if I start taking that, the disease is going to stop replicating in my body. I have unprotected sex with somebody. I am less infectious to that person. So without access to those drugs, the state is in real danger of HIV becoming an epidemic. It's already an epidemic in certain communities. Eastern North Carolina, ravaged by HIV. But in Winston-Salem, it could easily become an epidemic if everyone lost access to their free drugs and was not practicing safe sex, engaging in risky behaviors, needle sharing, that kind of stuff. And needle sharing, need to be clear, isn't just about illegal drug use. It's about someone using a diabetic syringe 100 times because they can't afford to buy a whole new case, or only monthly can they afford needles, or a family who has 3 diabetics sharing a needle. That's often how hepatitis and HIV get shared. And another demographic that is very important, that has unique social characteristics, which is the Latino community. It's because from a cultural standpoint, it's very polarized in many ways. They believe that if I wear an amulet filled with certain things, it's going to protect me from disease. Cultural competence at our agency is extremely important. We see people disappearing all the time, and we find out that months later they call us and they've been deported. When they get sent back to their countries, that is the death sentence, because there is not the access to drugs, and there's no way to get them those drugs. It's taking a problem and just making it worse. Basically, everything we do ties back to medication. Did you take your medication? What is secondary? What is stopping you from taking that medication? I believe that there have been really great steps in eradicating the disease, but I don't think it's something that's going to happen, maybe not in my lifetime, one day.